The rain had just started, tapping against the coffee shop window, when I noticed him standing outside. Shoulders hunched, his head pulled up against the weather. He was instantly recognizable. Even after all these years, I'd know that familiar stance and walk anywhere. A strange feeling tugged at me, a mix of nostalgia and something unnamed. It had been so long since I'd thought about Ethan, and yet seeing him here now stirred up emotions I hadn't expected. Last I'd seen him was at our college graduation, back when life felt like a puzzle just beginning to take shape. In those days, things had felt simple. We were two young guys sharing a cramped apartment, splitting rent, bemoaning exams, and laughing over failed relationships. Our friendship had been effortless, built on late-night conversations, inside jokes, and lazy weekends on the couch. But after graduation, he'd left for a job in a city miles away, while I stayed, each of us chasing something we never really explained to each other. Now, out of nowhere, he was here again. When Ethan stepped inside, brushing rain off his jacket, he looked around, his eyes widening slightly when they landed on me. I gave him a small wave, feeling unexpectedly shy and awkward. He grinned, crossing over to my table. The scent of rain clung to him, fresh and familiar, and memories hit me with surprising intensity. He greeted me, sliding into the chair across from me, and we exchanged the usual catch-up questions. I found myself looking at him as if he were a new person, yet the same Ethan I remembered. His face had changed in the small, subtle ways time leaves its marks, but his curious eyes and easy smile were still there. We fell into conversation quickly, as though no time had passed, talking about work, family, old college friends, and our lives since. And underneath it all, there was something new, a tension that hadn't been there back then, something unspoken that lingered between words. As we sat there, the old rhythm of our friendship resurfaced, but I could sense an edge to it. We laughed about our college days, remembering how we'd pull all-nighters fueled by takeout and cheap coffee, how we'd wander the city at night, filling the silence with plans for our future lives. But now, the laughter held a weight, as if each memory were a question. What if? Ethan talked about his career in architecture, his eyes lighting up when he described projects that took him across the country. I listened, trying to ignore the pang of envy and regret rising in me. He seemed to be living the life he'd always wanted, while I felt stuck in a job that, though comfortable, had none of the excitement I'd once envisioned for myself. I felt pride for him, but something else too, a yearning I couldn't shake. After a while, we drifted into silence. I found myself studying him, tracing the lines of his face, watching the way his gaze would shift, almost shyly, back to me. It was so familiar yet new, as though time had deepened his presence in some way I hadn't noticed back then. I realized I wanted to ask him things I'd never dared to before, to press into that space between us and uncover whatever it was that had always lingered unsaid. Ethan broke the silence, his tone casual, but his words holding a weight that made my pulse quicken. I'll be here for a few weeks, maybe a month. It all depends on how long this project takes. There was something in his expression, a trace of hesitation, a glimmer of hope, that made me wonder if he wanted me to respond, to ask him to stay longer. I tried to keep my tone casual as I replied, but my heart was racing. A month. The word echoed in my mind, filled with a mix of excitement and dread. After we left the coffee shop, he offered to walk me home. The streets were dark and wet, reflecting the soft glow of streetlights. Our steps fell into a comfortable rhythm, and every so often, our arms would brush, sending sparks through me that I couldn't ignore. I had no idea if he felt it too, or if it was just me reading into the silence. But the air between us was charged, thick with everything we hadn't said back then, and everything we were too afraid to say now. As we reached my building, he paused, hands tucked in his pockets, looking at me with a hesitant smile. "Want to grab a drink?" he asked, his voice casual, but his gaze lingering. I laughed, more out of nerves than humor, but nodded. It was the same bar we used to go to in college, a place filled with years of memories. Inside, the atmosphere felt both nostalgic and surreal. We joked and shared old stories, and as the drinks went down, I felt a warmth that melted my tension. His laugh was infectious, pulling me in, reminding me of the late nights we'd spent like this years ago. But this time, something was different. There was an intensity to his gaze, a softness that seemed to linger every time our eyes met. At one point, his hand brushed mine as he reached for his glass. Neither of us pulled away. Our fingers stayed there, just touching, as the space between us seemed to narrow, our connection somehow feeling stronger than ever. His gaze softened and his voice, low and intimate, broke through the noise of the bar. "I missed this. I missed you." I could feel my heart pounding, the words hanging in the air like an invitation. In the past, I might have shrugged it off with a laugh, but this time I felt the weight of it, the vulnerability in his expression. The moment felt raw and real, and I couldn't deny that I'd missed him too, in ways I hadn't allowed myself to admit until now. I whispered back, "Yeah, I missed you too, Ethan," and with those words, it was as if an invisible barrier finally dissolved between us. The walk back to my apartment was quiet but full of meaning. Every step, every glance, seemed charged, building to something inevitable. When we reached my door, we both paused, lingering in the stillness, caught between the past and whatever was about to happen next. Ethan met my eyes, his expression unreadable, and in a voice barely above a whisper he asked, "Mind if I come up for a bit?" My heart was racing as I nodded, leading him inside. The air felt heavy, thick with anticipation. Inside my apartment, Ethan took off his jacket, glancing around with a soft smile. "Feels like you," he murmured. I laughed, a bit too quickly, and replied, "It's just a small place, nothing special." But he didn't seem to mean the space itself. He was talking about something else, something unspoken but felt. He stepped closer, his gaze intent, and I felt every nerve in my body come alive as his hand lifted, brushing a stray lock of hair from my face. The world seemed to slow as he leaned in, his lips brushing mine softly, tentatively, as if testing if this was real. I closed my eyes, feeling his hand on my shoulder, and in that moment, every unspoken feeling, every buried thought, rose to the surface. As we kissed, a flood of memories and emotions overwhelmed me, blending the past and the present in a single heartbeat. For the first time, I let myself feel it all. And I knew he was feeling it too. The world beyond us faded away as we stood there, wrapped in each other, finally crossing a line we'd spent years skirting around. His hands on my shoulders were firm but tender, grounding me in the reality of this moment. It wasn't a hurried kiss. It was slow and deliberate, each second filled with the weight of everything unspoken between us. When we finally pulled apart, our foreheads rested against each other, breaths mingling in the quiet. Ethan's gaze held mine, and I could see a mixture of relief and vulnerability there, as if he, too, had been waiting for this moment. He whispered, barely audible, "I didn't think I'd ever feel this way again." His words echoed my own thoughts, and without thinking, I responded, "Neither did I." It was the only truth I had, but it felt enough. The silence between us wasn't awkward but heavy with meaning, an understanding that went beyond anything words could capture. I reached for his hand, feeling our fingers interlace, as if they'd been meant to fit together all along. He gave my hand a gentle squeeze, a silent acknowledgement that we were both here, both ready to finally face this. The next few days were a blur, yet I felt more awake than I had in years. We spent every spare moment together, navigating between our old memories and this new closeness we were building. He'd join me for morning coffee. We'd share quiet conversations over takeout in my apartment, and sometimes we'd just walk through the city, saying little but feeling everything. Every glance, every brush of his hand against mine, held a meaning I couldn't put into words but felt in every cell of my body. I'd find myself stealing glances, studying the lines of his face, the way his eyes softened when he looked at me, as if he'd been holding this closeness in his heart all along. One evening, as we lay together in the quiet dimness of my apartment, his arm wrapped around me, Ethan sighed softly, tracing idle patterns on my arm. "What happens when this project is over, and I have to leave again?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The question lingered in the air, sinking in. I'd known this moment would come eventually, but I pushed it to the back of my mind, afraid to confront the reality of it. I felt my chest tighten, the thought of him leaving stirring a familiar ache. I searched his face, seeing the same fear reflected back at me. "I don't know," I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion, "but I want to make this work. I don't want this to end here." He nodded, looking relieved but still uncertain. His gaze drifted, lost in thought. I don't want this to be something that fades away, something that just becomes another memory," he admitted. His words struck me, and I reached out, squeezing his hand, trying to convey everything I couldn't say. We lay there in silence, holding on to each other, as if that alone could keep this moment from slipping away. The weight of the unknown loomed over us, but there was a quiet strength in his hold, a reassurance that somehow we'd figure this out together. I realized then that whatever challenges lay ahead, this connection was too real, too deep to simply let go. And with that thought, a fragile hope began to take root, though I had no idea how we'd bridge the distance that was bound to come. In the days that followed, we tried to keep things light, but an unspoken tension lingered beneath the surface. I could feel the countdown ticking away, every day bringing us closer to his departure. We didn't talk about it directly, but it was always there, a shadow hanging over every laugh, every kiss, every quiet moment we shared. The fear of losing him, of this becoming just a fleeting chapter in my life, gnawed at me. One night, as we sat together, Ethan looked over at me, his gaze more intense than usual. "I don't want to keep this hidden," he said, his voice soft but steady. "I want us to be something real." His words hit me, a mix of relief and terror all at once. I nodded, feeling the weight of the decision settling over us. I wanted that too. I wanted us to be more than a brief, stolen moment in time. We held each other, both of us searching for the courage to face whatever came next, to hold on even if it meant taking risks we'd never taken before. In that moment, something shifted. I knew that whatever fears I had about the future, whatever distance or challenges we might face, I was willing to try. As Ethan's project neared its end, a tension settled over us, tightening each goodbye, every lingering touch. We both knew that our time was running out, but neither of us had the words to confront it head-on. I tried to focus on the present, savoring each moment, but thoughts of him leaving were always there, like a faint ache I couldn't ignore. One night, as we lay together in the soft glow of the city lights filtering through my window, he shifted beside me, turning to look into my eyes. "I don't want this to end here," he said, his voice steady but edged with vulnerability. "But I don't know what's next. I don't know if we can make this work, being apart." I took his hand, feeling his fingers tighten around mine, as if he were holding on for dear life. "Maybe we don't have to figure it all out right now," I whispered. "Maybe we just take it one step at a time." It wasn't a grand solution, but it was the only truth I had to offer. I wasn't ready to let him go, not when we'd only just found each other, and I could see in his eyes that he wasn't ready either. When the day finally came for him to leave, we spent the morning in quiet, lingering moments, as if we could somehow slow time by holding each other a little tighter. At the train station, we stood in silence, each of us struggling to find the right words. "Call me when you get there," I said, my voice barely steady. He nodded, his hand lingering on mine, his gaze intense, as if trying to memorize every detail of my face. Finally, he whispered, "This isn't goodbye. I'll be back." There was a promise in his voice, one I clung to as he walked toward the platform, turning back once with a faint smile. I watched him until he disappeared, my heart heavy but filled with a new kind of hope. The weeks after he left were strange, a mix of emptiness and anticipation. We talked every day, his voice a comfort, filling the quiet spaces in my life that felt so empty without him there. As the days passed, our connection only grew stronger, grounded in the silent understanding that we were both choosing this, choosing each other, even across the miles. And then one evening, my phone buzzed with a text. "I've got some vacation time coming up," he wrote. "How about I come back for a while?" I felt a smile spread across my face, relief flooding through me. He was coming back. We would have another chance to build something real, one step at a time. Looking back, I realized how much I had been waiting for this, waiting for him, for this feeling, for a love that felt undeniable. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to my channel for more. See you next time